All right. It's been ages since I've been able to say, if YouTube is to be believed, we are now live. And I choose to believe YouTube at this time. And I'm here with a guest, as you can see, beautifully lit.
Only in the lighting, which is so congruous with the genre that we're going to speak upon.
So right now you're wrestling with your light half and your dark half.
It's almost as if the transporter beam had split the two in half.
That's right. Well, let's see who I get to talk to this evening. So, for those of you who don't recognize the voice or the face, this is the Complex Games Apologist, and we're going to be chatting about Star Trek Adventures. Okay, let's see. Where are you with your group's campaign? Has it wrapped up, or are you near the end?
So right now we are midway through, I believe, the published adventure called Signals that Jim had been running. And so I had the opportunity to bring in the first officer character who had been a connective tissue and a plot plug, if you will, prior to Nera. And I got to personify her, and that was very fun because I had been running the previous 5 episodes, and so she got to come to life. And so we're midway through that, and we put the brakes on that kind of in the middle as we started to catch the BX fever. But the ship and the crew, I think, are well ensconced and in a place where we could return for future episodes where we like to. But I think at the moment we've kind of put a cap on playing. Maybe we'll try and do a little bit before Christmas, but we're pretty happy with how far we came with it.
Cool. With us, we have just wrapped up what we're calling season 1. We, for those of whom this is their first Star Trek Adventures video on this channel, we were running it with a very, very broad conceit that people were actually watching what we were playing, and kind of a meta commentary on on gaming, maybe. So sessions would start with me describing the family coming in, settling down on the sofa to watch square television in the 90s. And so this was our first season of television using the show, and we ran. How far did we get? I guess we did 6 or 7 discrete adventures with Star Trek, and have wound up back at our starting point with the commanding officer being court-martialed, and the XO, who is a player character, trying to get promoted to get into that position. So it's very, very political and conspiracy and drama and whatnot.
But nevertheless, you've really touched upon the exploration and sort of the bottle episode idiom, where you go to a new planet and it's the next thing.
Yep.
And that's something which seems to the game seems to handle pretty aptly. But I don't think that I succeeded as much as you have with creating connections between the separate adventures. And so we kind of did start over with each go.
So kind of like later season Star Trek of the original series. Kind of like random. How are they in this place? Wasn't the star date different last time? And that kind of stuff.
It may be owing to that. I think that there is something about the Roll20 prep, all the visual spectacle that I was really preoccupied with for the first half of the campaign, that I was very hung up on making sure that I had that stuff ready to go for the next adventure, and so I was not able to feel the fluve, the river of a traditional campaign, because I was using the episodic format to hold myself up as a crutch to be ready with the next packet of spectacle, right. Which it turns out nobody really in the group proper, it was not particularly special for anyone who was there.
I don't know if it wasn't special. I didn't hear that in the recaps. I think what I heard most was how distracted they were by all the things that they could do with Roll20 or had to do with Roll20, and and I kind of inserted my own thing between the lines, like we're all old men and this is just too much.
I have to admit that I went into it with a feeling of agnosticism about, and I with several different access points, with the macro buttons at the bottom, thinking you could type slash roll whatever, and
Right.
that seemed natural to me. Or you could roll a physical die, but interestingly, the idiom of the medium. It implied some sort of oppressive, like, you must have a camera to do Star Trek. If you're in Roll20, you must use your character sheet to roll your dice.
Mm.
And somehow that session 0 conversation just never was had.
Well, sometimes you have to play to figure out what needs to be in a session 0, and I think we both commented when we first got Star Trek that this game, while it is a comfortable role-playing game, it kind of, not even kind of, it asks you to play differently or to consider playing differently before you get back to so that level of comfort. Um,
Yeah, if you mean the structure of scenes and the idea that you arrive at the Schwerpunkt as the camera fades in, you're already at the critical moment. And there's not that probative, I'd like to look under the door, GM. Is there any water in the room, GM? And so on. And so everything is, if that prescription to start in the middle of everything is central to the game, which I think it's at least strongly suggested. That is certainly contrary to the rest of our how we play.
Generally, yeah, and just little things like there are resources that you will generate that you don't have to share, but are able at a point to share. And these are all things to be learned. I mean, it's asking us to, yeah, exactly. It's asking us to consider who we are, why we're there, what everything means from our own perspective first, and then, open out into the viewpoint of the rest of the table or the rest of the scene in a way that I think can be off-putting or intimidating at first and make you feel like you have to pay attention to minutia, or make you feel like you have to like where I have to have these chips and I have to have these dice and things like that. But all it's asking you to do is be aware of them and then play. And of course, it's like adapting to a new car. You already know how to drive, but where exactly are the the high beams and low beams, and like, how do I connect to the Bluetooth, all that stuff.
So this is an interesting point, is that it's perfectly possible to narrate your actions as a character, arrive at difficulties, roll the dice, earn momentum, and spend that right in the moment. The obligation to spend that, however, like when the pool is capped, it is
Right.
essentially the same feeling as if you ignored the existence of the pool. If it were a game where you spent degrees of success, as perhaps like Fantasy Age is, like there are games where when you achieve additional degrees, you pick stunts or whatever.
Right.
And so if the pool is capped, it's that same situation. And I'm not sure whether I'm really responding to your prompt from kind of where you were going with this, but my thought is that we've experienced moments where it we're pulled out of it either because we're pulled out of it in this by like our system proficiency. We know that this stuff is, and we are over 6 and we have to spend this stuff down, or we have all this bonus momentum that must be spent in the moment. And that's the same experience as if someone pretended that none of these pools existed.
Yes.
And I think that that's what I mean to say is that you can be in the exact same place once you're in deep as if you're in shallow. So that may mean that you're always gaining more experience with that sort of whatever it is, that feeling of being taken out of a prior element. Um, it certainly.
Well, like as an example, the last
Okay.
the last adventure. I hate calling things adventures now. I seem to have developed an aversion to the word. So in the last adventure, which ran for 6 sessions, the the player running the XO character was absolutely in charge. Right, so uh, it didn't involve scenes with the captain at all. And for most of the episode, the captain had recused herself to her stateroom and locked herself under guard. So she's actually out of things. She's not in charge of the vessel. He is, which meant that the risk aversive behavior of the crew was magnified. Right.
Because they were custodians of the captain's command, or just because they were cut loose?
Because this is the personality of the executive officer.
I see.
Um, he likes to always be in a position of strength, and you know, he has this personal value of I don't start fights, I finish them. Right. So when his command is forward, we see a lot of politeness. We see a lot of defense before offense. Like he will take the time to maneuver in behind the enemy and fire a killing shot rather than engage in broadsides and that sort of stuff. So they were generating a massive amount of momentum, which you could see, like for my position, away from the table. I stand up when I run the game. I could see people maybe wanted to spend in the moment, but chose to keep banking. Right. They would spend what they needed to do to get more information if they didn't get enough information, or to increase the amount of work done in extended tasks, or to reduce the resistance, that kind of thing. They would use it practically, but I felt as an observer they weren't using as much as they had been when the NPC, or the support character, the captain, was in charge, who has very different values and is very much more gung ho about certain things.
So this is an interesting thing about how the weather gauge of the different disciplines might play, is that the command discipline often acts after or informed by, it commands the other disciplines to do things, or it sums the prior discipline's actions. If it were cautious, as you're describing, then the commander is responding to the mounting amount of it. If the commander is bold, then the commander commands the other disciplines. Um, and that's a really fascinating, and it's frankly it. I mean, as a compliment, that's sort of a facile observation about the game that I don't think I've ever noticed, is that on the face of it, the tempo of the different disciplines might be different from each other, just in the way that they interact with this whole economy of the pools.
Right. And so the our commanding officer, whoever that happens to be, they can do things like issue orders. And the way that's worked out in our particular group is that they issue orders to the the people without a player character, to the non-main characters in the scene, to use the lingo of the game, right? In most cases. So our pilot, for example, right, our Sulu, is a secondary character, and one who's rarely inhabited, but when he is, it's usually the executive officer who takes that character over, kind of staying within the realm of ops. And I've also noticed that our engineer character tends to inhabit other engineers, and our science officer likewise. Our security officer doesn't tend to inhabit other people, but what we end up with is there's a clear message from the command chair about what the tone of the particular response to a stimulus will be, and he will lend assistance dice, he will provide extra actions, etc., using the tools and talents at his disposal, which has an effect of having commanded the main characters, right? This is what I'd like to see happen, right? He states an intention for the scene, right? We've got a cloaked Romulan vessel sneaking around behind us. I want to know where it is, and I want to be in a position to fire on it. You know.
Yeah, so the chosen posture of the commander, I think, has a lot to do with the idiom of Star Trek, and possibly it has a lot to do with whether this game works well. So Aloy has been inclined to be very thoughtful about getting right the system side moves that he does. And at the same time, for whatever reason, possibly because we had Dr. Took, who was off the bridge or was in a consultative role. We didn't have that bridge crew feeling for a lot, and your own observations and suggestions kind of brought that to remedy at the tail end of the game. But before that, I don't know that we got that same experience of the posture of command, getting in there with the nitty gritty of assistance dice, with direct tasks, with the additional minor actions that some talents in the command chair can provide.
Right.
Because there was sort of a feeling of, well, fifes. Like, here's your fife over here, and here's my thing over here. And so maybe we missed out on that.
I don't know.
Or that might be a part of the game that you get to have when you are doing a more core bridge crew experience.
Right. It would be very difficult to replicate that, if you were just doing away missions. Like, for example, if you had like a prime team from the old Prime Directive Star Trek game, where everything happens like you start on the planet kind of deal. I mean, you're going to have a lot of teamwork and coordination, but you're not going to be drawing on the ship as much. You're not going to be coordinating with a lot of secondary characters, and you shrink down your possible interactions. But a lot of our stuff, yes, we were a bridge crew. We were a particular shift on the bridge crew. We had overlapping crew assignments. We were all connected to different other parts of the ship, and yeah, so it had that that interactive nature to it, for sure.
And this is one of those things where I think, I don't know if it's because you were playing with paper, or it could have been that we handicapped ourselves with how you have to create the entity of a supporting character in Roll20. And the dignifying it with that creation also says that it is a supporting character. It's not just a crew member who might then get fleshed out to that, because there's random, there's Ensign Morvik in sensor control, which is not necessarily going to rise to that level. there was not those opportunities to uh to kind of get that multiplicity earlier on, and
Right.
that might be because
We could just do it. Yeah.
you could just do it, or you could fake it until fake it until you needed to make it.
Right, and that was another thing that was kind of like life imitating art. You know, the player playing our executive officer always had a notebook open, and all the names of the crew were there, and everyone else had the floor plan of the our ship was the USS Crow, and we ended up building a very long document with what's on different decks, where everybody's quarters are, that kind of thing, to help remind us, because we're only playing for a short period of time, once a week. If we're lucky, it's once a week. And I've got a big display panel behind me showing um, often it's just showing the bridge or showing the uniforms from art that I'd found online. And the image I always had of them on the bridge was everybody swarming to different locations on the bridge to lean over each other's shoulders to contribute their dialogue. Used to make me laugh. Not like Kirk, sitting central in his chair and talking to people, and people dialoguing across the whole width of the bridge. It really felt to me like people were actually moving around and leaning in and lifting their leg up like Riker to get really close.
I mean, that's the idiom of TNG, certainly, and really that kind of attention to precision. You know, what deck is what, and all that. That's it's only present to my mind in TNG and to a lesser extent in Enterprise. And where people's Star Trek touchstones lie, I think, has a lot to do with how they're inclined to access that sort of tone. And then from that tone, whether there is a book of NPCs, and then like today, Ensign Vorik in Astrometrics is going to be dignified with becoming a full supporting character. We're going to spend a crew support upon him.
Right.
Whereas he doesn't exist, and he doesn't until DC Fontana decides to write him into being.
Right.
And so, different touchstones for Star Trek. For my part, the Rick Sternbach, Michael Okuda technical manual, and that sort of feeling that it all exists somewhere.
Right.
If these are my Harn binders, there's a book for the USS Crow by your reckoning.
Right.
And I found that was not necessarily the way. That was alien to some perceptions of Star Trek. Let me put it that way. Which is fine. But then it how you get to take advantage of, and if you will take advantage of those mechanics, to help you along the way, it is a question. You have to get proficiency with it, however you want to do it.
Right.
And it sounds like people were generally more. There was not a time lag getting on the same page.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we chose Star Trek instead of Conan, for example, which I wanted to run as much, when I got them pretty close together in time.
You wanted to do Conan as Conan.
I wanted to do Conan as Conan. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I wanted to do Conan as the bridge crew pretending to be Conan in the holodeck. So there was still a strong desire in me to do Conan, even when we were playing Star Trek. But I was the only one who really wanted to do sword and sorcery at that point. And everyone else is very much into the science fiction. And at the point we started Star Trek, of course, we were saying that the Star Wars campaign is just on hold while we kind of regroup creatively and try and figure out what we want to do with it. And so we'll play Star Trek for a while. Now, I've fallen in love with Star Trek as we've played it. The others similarly, but the lure to go back to Star Wars is also very strong. So, but everybody in the group is a Trekkie, and and two of the members had been watching the original series after having completed the Next Generation, after having completed DS9. So there's a lot of comfort with the material. Then, so I've got one strong TNG fan. I've got two strong Star Trek fans. I'm a Star Trek fan, so it was just comfortable to walk in and play. Maybe even more so than playing Star Wars. Somehow.
This is an interesting point. And I don't know whether this is. Oh, fine.
Go for it.
So, Star Trek, Star Wars. I think most of the time, the beginning is still about like adventuresome characters. The games always begin with characters who are the sort of characters that even if they don't would meet in a bar to do a quest.
That's right. Or to get to hire someone to go to Alderaan.
Whereas there's there's a chain of command of some form or another, the way that Star Trek Adventures is built. Nobody ever thought twice about whether that was because all the shows are always about Starfleet. And so there was not a great deal of thought about that. Ivan might want to have an Edge of the Federation game. It might be on
Harry
his
Mudd game.
It might be more to his taste, but the subtext of the game and the what the source material is was never ambiguous. But I find that for a lot of people, the learning curve begins with the whole discussion of chain of command, the whole discussion of having a set of values that are institutional values, just being a core component of the game.
Yeah.
Is something which learning curve is experienced on. And so a lot of GMs, wary of their group, even will start their group on a dumpy patrol boat or freighter, what have you,
Farragut or something like that,
because they don't trust their murder hobos.
We had a slightly different experience, but one of the things that we talked about, no one wanted to be the captain. No one actually wanted to be the captain, but no one wanted anyone else to be the captain either. And
a lot of conversations about this game
go that way. So what we did was we made the captain a secondary character, and I thought I wondered, should I make her an NPC? Or should I make her a secondary character? But my goal was that she would be played by everybody. I wanted everybody to be the captain. I wanted the XO character to be able to sit down and have a conversation with either me as the captain running that character or any one of the other players, and that she would develop her personality organically.
So this is an interesting distinction, is because I don't know if I soaked this in, but very early on I heard that supporting characters are player characters, period, full stop.
Right.
And so I always thought that meant that, sure, one character could have a conversation with this, but somebody would have to be playing that character. And even in the text, it sounds like someone can play two characters at once. So Dr. Took might be around, and one of them is active or inactive.
Right.
And so the active character, and so on. And so, yeah, I found myself discomfited, I don't know if that's the right diction, but yeah, I never grabbed a supporting character to play as the GM. Because I felt like there was that was the realm of PCs, and then NPCs were characters like your engineer.
Right. Our engineer was designed very specifically to create tension. I don't want to say, I don't know, maybe friction, but anyway, to
he's
the
an NPC
unfriendly
and he generates threat. That's been loud and clear from the beginning.
But with this captain, I was never really sure. And there are times when I'll take secondary characters because all the players are playing their characters. And they want to focus on that. So I'll take on the role of the navigator or whatever, just to keep things smooth. So it's something that I have to juggle. I prefer them to play them so that they take on the mannerisms that they are imagining rather than the ones that I'm imagining. But with the captain, I built her.
And I don't. Yeah, I don't want to do that premature measure. Like I don't want to lock in the way this guy is. Right. Then there's also I don't know. I read that bit about like an inactive character. Like if you're playing two characters at once, the inactive characters can only do difficulty 0 stuff.
Right. They just become you're changing which one is a main character and which one isn't for that particular.
Yeah, and I was wary to kind of give an escape hatch to that, like that they could, and then maybe this is me being gamist. I
don't change those rules though.
Okay. If you say you don't.
If you know what I mean. Like if I'm giving voice to someone, it's the same as if they're not being played.
Okay, and so that person can't really do anything besides they could earn momentum, but only with difficulty 0 incidents.
Right. So it's encouragement for the players to actually choose to play them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that disambiguates a lot of kind of my reading of your recaps then.
Right.
Let's talk some more now that I know that.
So what I wanted to say about the captain was that I had her in my head both as an NPC and as a supporting character. So what do I do about this? And so then the answer is about to be revealed in the next recap. Is that of course she has a background in, let's say, keeping things secret. And so, as we, the audience, wouldn't know, and as most of the writers of the show wouldn't know, as nobody writing, Darth Vader would know, right? There were secrets that she was keeping buried. So not even our Beta Z XO had picked up from her thoughts that she has some ulterior motives. She's good at her compartmentalization. And so in the last episode, when we're kind of bringing things together to round out the end of the season and deciding whether or not there's going to be a second season, she became an NPC for that episode.
So this is one of those things where I think that values are really apt to they work very well with this sort of arc building thought, because the GM's purview is the complications, the value complications. So if this captain character were to have good at keeping secrets, there's this kind of value there that could beget any manner of complication. The truth of what those complications are and what sort of them, it's the GM's, full stop. So I think that really, I don't know, that's exciting. Suffice it to say,
the values have been,
even if a player was playing the captain at that moment, you could still say, you could hand them an index card.
You could, yes. And I wanted to be honest, I wanted to say, okay, here you go. But in the last 3-4 sessions, our entire player group wasn't available. And so we were playing with 2 people, and then we added in a new player who was learning the system, learning his character and everything. And so I stepped back from doing that, and I just said, okay, I'll do it. But it was fun.
So this is, I mean, that's an interesting thing to talk about, is shifts in the player group. And that's a question. That's really a practical question for my part, because the legwork of creating the ship and the story, I hesitate, but the idiom of this particular show,
The idiom,
the way
yeah.
that these episodes are put together, and how this particular game or story works, that's defined now, and all the effort that took is, as long as one or two people are carried along, that's probably would still be there. And so I guess as those human player cast changes happened, um, did you feel like you carried some of those earned gains? Those, the stuff that it takes time as a group to build up. Do you feel like those carried through,
I
or were
do.
more eroded? Okay.
I mean, anytime that there's a shift in personnel, the
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere changes, especially when this person is completely new to you and the entire group. Right? Everyone's getting to know everybody.
That unfamiliarity is a fun thing, though, too.
Yeah, it was fun. It I don't know. It made it more playful. It felt more like we were playing than the
Yep.
ritual it had become.
And that's exactly how I feel about it. Yeah.
So
But it
that
still
was cool.
felt like the USS Crow that you had built up together before that.
There was a lot of self-referential stuff about things that have been going on because while I was doing the bottle show, as you mentioned, as we do, like things happening only on the ship or things happening in these isolated systems as they were exploring unfamiliar territory, there was a meta continuity with the relationship between the different departments. So the Marine Corps and the security chief, they don't get along. Why not? And the engineer is always unhappy. Why? And the captain
So,
is aloof. Why?
so this is an interesting. I mean, this is a reserve or a trepidation about that sort of thing. Is that, are those things really true for the new character or the character that hasn't seen those? Is there a burden to show, not tell, for that character that is coming along new to that stuff that's been built up?
Right on. So he was described as having been aboard the ship, obviously because we had left port, we're on an exploration mission. We couldn't go back and get new crew, but he was shifted from the days where he works or he had been working with the captain to nights where he's working under the XO. And so there's a relationship that he had with the captain, was made aware of with what the captain is like. But the rest, he was a science officer. He didn't have to normally deal with engineers or engineering, and that sort of stuff. He was in the data collection aspect of things. So he as his character is learning what the different relationships are between the department, so too is the player. While people are talking about things that have happened, and then while they need to rely on these different characters while they're on away missions, or and so on and so forth. So that all happened organically. So what changed was what that particular character brought to the table. Because unlike all the other characters that had been portrayed, he would do things on his own.
Okay. Okay.
And to the potential destruction of the ship at one point. So we got to have one of those
This
kind
is
of.
interesting because that's generally everybody on our crew.
Well, I mean,
Don't get me
we're a
wrong,
team of
they talk
people
to
in
each
real
other a
life.
lot, but
Yeah.
I I can't think of any one of them that doesn't just do things.
So yeah, a normal situation aboard the USS Crow will have the ops manager turn to the XO and says, you know, this is what I think would be a good solution for the problem, and the XO either supports it or asks for other opinions, and then they make it happen. And this situation was, we don't know enough about this mysterious alien object So I'm going to do a deep probe to get more information, and then I'm going to
spend
report.
some ship's power, and I'm going to just do it.
Yeah.
And that's to my, I mean, and this is maybe my own impatience as like a person, a human being at the table, but you know, my experience of the idiom at the show is, you know, like Data at least would just hit the button and just spend like 4 ships power and take the complication risk, because yeah, he's already knows that he's Picard's golden boy, and so he hits the button, and now with all this bonus momentum, then he lectures everyone with all these obtained information spends, and that acts, talks, and walks like the show and the duck, and so I'm very happy.
Yeah, like so that made the session really interesting, and so that was fun. And then we got to have that.
I take
that
it everyone else was a bit.
No, they were. Well, like I said, it felt like we were playing a game now, right? So the players are laughing. The characters are preparing for their crew review at the end of the ship week. You know, here are all the things that I never want to see again as a member of my bridge crew. And then I, of course, at the end of the adventure, have to deal with reputation and possible promotion, right? So how does the entire crew of the USS Crow feel about the things that put them in danger? Right. So it's really interesting to have the XO. Like, you know, we kind of do this as a round table, right? I am the voice of the ship, and I say this is how the crew feels, and then they have a chance to kind of complain to my face. Oh, wouldn't the crew feel this way, or wouldn't the crew feel that way? As players,
it's interesting. So the reputation gains. You look at it from the point of view of the crew,
right? So it, like, one of the things is put the ship in peril, right?
So, and I've always looked at this as a court martial board of admirals.
Well, there's that too,
or post captains. Like I've always looked at it from the military posterity perspective.
And were we playing not way out in the beta quadrant, away from everybody? That's exactly how I would do it too.
It could be that I've just read way too much Patrick O'Brien. It could just be me.
No, I'm right there with you. But I wanted, like we talked about earlier when the campaign was starting, we really wanted, it was important to me that the ship feel real. So this was one way that I can bring in the hundreds of crew members, right? So what does it feel like when the XO, who they know is commanding during the combat, right?
No, yeah. How do they feel about it? Which is, that's one of those unfulfilled promises of Voyager, is that the question, you know, the crew is judging the captain, you know, kind of contemplating
whether
the
different divisions of factions
and captain. Yeah.
So, and I think I was informed by Crimson Tide, you know, the dynamic between the captain and the XO, right, in the submarine. So I wanted to have that feeling. How important are these relationships? So for me, it was, you know, it was that, and then, but all of this is delivered in the voice of the captain, right? So at the end of that, you know, the XO winds up getting a large amount of positive reputation from the crew to assist in their development, and so does the ops manager. But the science officer who imperiled them all received more negative than positive, and so it was interesting to see that dynamic in action. And their rank has increased enough during the course of the campaign that they're not worried about taking risks, which is nice. Whereas at the beginning of the campaign, they were worried about anything which might be perceived of as negative. They wanted to be the perfect Starfleet officers.
So you mean the reputation score?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an interesting thing that I would like to play more and get a feel of. But the tension of the commendations and the potential benefit from them in the command division book, versus accepting additional reputation. That's a place where
It takes a while to get there.
Yeah, it takes a while to get there. That part of the game is it's very difficult to visualize the way that the reputation rules are written. You have
It
to
doesn't help that
read.
they're scattered across different parts of the book.
Well, I mean, they appear in
Like
two different
everything else.
places. That's but for my part, what we've had to do every single time with every reputation roll is I just open the book. And here we are. We're talking about it again. And we read through word for word, a
The whole
word at
chart.
a time. If the roll is this many or more, then
Yeah.
because it's so.
It's just a task roll, but the difficulty is set by your reputation.
Yeah, it doesn't say it that way though.
No, it says it in a way that I'm right there with you. I've got my PDF open and I'm cursing under my breath because the two things I want, which should be on one page, are not. and we go through. So this is what I want you to do. This is how many dice you need. And they're like, because one of our adventures is anywhere from 2 to 4 and well as long as 6 sessions.
Yes,
Which
and so
would
that's the
be
thing
2 or
is
3
that
months.
I find myself spending the time. We do this moment where we talk about everything that's happened and we're like kind of do an accounting of all the different positive and negative influences. And then we're at the point, so we've already paid this opportunity cost of doing all that stuff.
Right.
And then there's an additional opportunity cost, which is that we have no idea how it works and we have to go back to the book.
We have to go back to the book. Yeah. And there are 2 charts you need, and they're on different pages, neither of which are bookmarked. So you just have to know where they are. I mean, you can make your own bookmarks.
I don't dispute the difficulty, but I'm not sure about the 2 different pages thing. But
there's a page that talks about how to assign the positive and negative feelings from the crew based on what they did, and then there's a different chart which has the reputation levels and
the meaning of the different reputation levels.
Yeah.
Oh, well, they mean what they mean. I mean, once you hit 20, once you hit like 17 or 18, you're up for promotion. But that's unlikely. That's in my experience, the way that the dice fall on that. It's we haven't gotten anywhere close to that.
Well, you have less risk averse, more solo acting crew members than I do.
Well, and there was also a meme which is planted, which was if you're not buying at least one die with one threat, then you're doing it wrong. Because Antoine should get to have fun, and so you have to give him some tokens to have fun.
That's a question I had for you. I think we're almost at it.
Yeah, I think Ivan arrived at that, but it's like is Antoine so entertaining that we have to give him tokens to do his thing? Like I ask away, and maybe this will structure the response.
All right, so it was hard for me to get my particular crew of players to relax about threat. Right, they didn't want. I'm not going to buy threat. Are you insane? And it's like, no, I'm not insane. I want you to, imperil the ship. But one of the ways that I helped them get over it was by when there was a scene change, there are traits connected to the scene, such as zero gravity or whatever, and those things in and of themselves generate threat. So I was curious if you were using scenes to generate threat for yourself, or if you are relying on player action to generate threat.
Generally, I have swum in it. But that is not to say that I have not. So depending on the scene frame, I have started the episode with more or less threat than the prescribed amount of 2 per character. And then I have, as a new scene begins, I have added some threat to represent a looming danger. But when it comes to traits, as a threat generator, my inclination is to set them up as increased complication range, so that they create the more threat when they have created it.
Right.
Like that they have to show rather than tell. Which isn't just, I mean, it's one and the same, because if you do it the other way, if you say zero gravity is +3 threat in the scene, then you're able to spend 2 to create a complication where someone's tricorder has fallen out of their hand.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, my goal was I didn't want them to be afraid of threat. Threat is named threat, but it makes the scene interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have them increasing the complication range. I have, by spending power on tasks, I have them giving me threat when they need it. They prefer to use momentum, which I think they should prefer to use momentum. And so but it took a while. It was similar in Star Wars with using the Destiny pool, right? They would keep an eye, and no one would ever want to spend the last white token, right, to flip it to give me all dark, because now he's gonna screw us. But it's like, well, I still can only spend one.
One. Yeah,
And
that's the other thing.
if it's all gone black, it's because I've been
Once
forgetting
he
to set
does it,
my player
then it'll be one white and some
here. Yeah.
black, as opposed
So
to all black.
eventually we got past it, and Destiny was used a lot, and then Destiny was used thematically. Like, how is this the hand of Destiny? So that was all nice, but it took time. And likewise, getting a good description out of a momentum spend or a good description out of a threat spend, depending on how
That's the
often
one
we played,
thing
falters.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever really gotten to a good place on it. And that could be because we, instead of these things that you can just touch while you go on, we had virtualized versions of those that required looking away, because there was a preference in the group for looking at the video, looking at each other, which is, I think for whatever reason, I would have never guessed that someone would prefer to really look at me while they were playing a game, because my mind's eye is really turned towards the world. But I learned that was a thing. And so going over and looking at the Roll20 screen where it was kept track of, for at least until I figured out how to do it here next to my face, that was an opportunity cost. Okay, that is the beginning of a paragraph responding to what you just said, which I fear I've lost enough data to carry on with.
What was it we were talking about? But we also have to check the time, because I understand that there was a time limit.
My wife is expecting that we will go play Stardew Valley, which is a notional farming game where you tend your crops, at some point this evening. So we'll probably have another 7 minutes or so.
All right,
of good grace.
So let's wind up then with closing thoughts.
Okay.
So you've been running Star Trek Adventures. You have actually been running some of the printed ones, which I avoid.
Jim ran one of the printed ones, and I enjoyed it. And at some points, I have the curse of knowledge that it was a printed one.
It makes a difference. Oh, he's running an adventure.
And as a player, and most of my experience as a player has been in organized play, or it is a printed adventure type deals. I thought that okay, we can just bang, I'm going to bang on this door. And once we get through this door, then we'll be into the next room.
Right.
And that curse of knowledge was not great. That's what that led me down a wrong path. That is a combination of my prior, my lack of experience as a player, and then knowing that it was a module.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that can like.
Which I've been
That's the
playing
fun
about.
of live play.
Okay, so yeah, I've run a fair amount of it, and then I got to play some of a module,
Right.
which began a thought that you had, which was starting to chug along there. The rest of that thought,
Oh, of my thought was that
yeah,
yeah, lots of things can. I mean, the fun of live play is how you react to things. Um, I had like for as an example, our famous combat between the USS Crow and this cloaked Romulan vessel
okay. So
with
this is
plasma
a good exchange to
torpedoes,
have.
right? I really
Mhm.
expected that the crew would, because of the way we had talked about it before, talked about it as people. I
Mhm.
thought that they would enjoy having the opportunity to see what the Crow could do in battle.
Mhm.
And what I got was, um, I don't start fights, I finish them. Right, the value took over,
Okay.
and um, the our Vulcan security officer, I have been and always will be your friend, was a value that she had
Mhm.
should put there. So instead of players enjoying rolling dice to blow crap up, what I got was
Mhm.
a crew desperate to uh, rescue their fellow crewmen stranded on the planet.
Which
And
is not
then,
necessarily a bad round
no,
by
not
round combat in
not
and of
bad at all.
itself either.
And then once they had done so, they wanted to get away if they could.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, this is really interesting, right? But in talking to them afterwards, playing their characters, they were convinced that they were outmanned, outgunned, out out everything. That it made sense. What I had been trying to portray was the Romulans kind of fronting. You know, they've got this massive weapon, but they're not able to go head to head kind of thing. So they have to rely on these stealth tactics and sniping. So uh, the players latched onto one part of what I was showing and not the other part of what I was showing, which I guess in other language means I didn't show the part that I wanted to show. And there are NPCs that you think they're going to love, and yet they hate. And there's environments you think they might think are challenging that they find really. I mean, the how people take a certain thing and the reasons why are varied. So whether it's the I'm in a module, so I'm going to do this because logically that makes that makes sense.
There's another thing on the other side.
There has to be, and so it's interesting. And Signals is an interesting adventure. I've heard Jim talk about Signals before and ways players have responded to it. Um, Such as not wanting him to fast forward over repetitious parts that they had clearly, solved as players, but not as characters yet. So I thought that's interesting.
So I think this is an interesting point to conclude on, is this discussion of um, how the content that you think will become rich, or that will suddenly kind of open up a well of a thick scene, or a scene that develops into a combat, or uh, a knot of complications, which we can't beam up. There's a stack of
Right.
complications that are bad stuff. The sorts of things that you think might end up that way um, can in fact not be. And it can be the transporter, it can be the warp drive, it can be the number of escape hatches in the genre. Um, and so it seems like there's one of the things to take away from that is that the game master, uh, if you want those situations to achieve that depth, um, coming from you, If you want to put players on the back foot with situations like that, it may not be your first or second or even third attempt, because they will use the warp drive. They will throw a lot of power tokens onto something and get all the information they need.
Right.
They will use the transporter.
They'll solve problems as they come up. Yeah.
And so the solution to the problems is not bad, but the players will have to make their own trouble through one of these moral conundra, which
Right.
you can help with value complications. Say, here's the point of determination, which I don't know how much of you've done, and I've tried to experiment with that, and to mixed extent.
I used it a lot in the beginning, and it became less necessary as things went on. It was established as a character trait.
Do it for themselves?
Yes.
Ever?
Yes.
They said, like, I would like to make this complication myself that will, it'll be a real complication. Like I have to do something, or it'll make some things harder, etc.
There was a value that the player was growing lukewarm about and really wanted to challenge, and so invoked it negatively. And then ended up keeping it. They liked how their character felt during all of that. So it was kind of interesting.
So lukewarm value. So you're talking about challenged values.
Right.
So that's different than complicated values.
Right.
All right. I'm gonna break down, and I'm gonna say this is a distinction which I think that the book should speak louder about.
No joke.
Is that these are the two ways that you can earn more points of determination for yourself. And if you challenge value, you can't then spend on the value because it's crossed out for the episode.
Right.
But that opportunity cost is not really, it's not spoken to in the text about complication. In fact, it's never spoken to. You just have to figure it out. It's crossed out, so that means that I can't spend it. Whereas if you complicate, here's this point, and then the GM says yes, and now you have this point, but maybe something is harder for you, including the thing that you might spend on later. Playing with that mechanic, I mean, as a means to generate momentum, I don't want to say as a means to, because that sounds very gamey.
We are playing a game.
I know, but these men that I've been playing with have led me to attempt to see things other ways. So anyway, I think that it's seeking determination is at least maybe it should not be a singular goal, but if you're going to inhabit the character, it certainly seems to be a reaped benefit from inhabiting the character.
Yes.
And so the reaping is not something that I think that the game speaks to loud enough, because the reaping will then allow you to do the Star Trek heroics, to be hyper competent. So if the assumption is that here you are, you're this kind of ubermensch, this Vitruvian man that Star Trek represents. So then, how do you get points to be Vitruvian? How do you inhabit that character? That's a part of the game that I thought I would get to see more of, and that I thought would be, I don't know. I like hearing about I don't start fights finished, I finish them. And I like hearing about I haven't always have been your friend. I like hearing about
everyone remember where we parked.
Everyone remember. That's exactly where I was going to go next. But in large part, what I found was that values were role played, and values informed decisions at the table. and in fact, it was impressive. Like in another game, I might have said, "Oh, here's some points," or at the end of the session, I would have said, "Like, you should get some extra experience points for being close to your concept." But because the burden, I don't want to say the burden, but because it either would have come at an opportunity cost of session time, where I said, "Oh, well, it sounds like you're trying to act out this value. Here's this, here's this complication for this thing that you're doing anyway." We ended up in the situations where the players played their characters to a T, including the values, but they didn't have the abundance of determination, especially in the early adventures where for whatever reason, was setting the task difficulties higher.
Well,
They didn't get to reap the benefits.
Yeah. It takes time to recognize that the task difficulties need to be lower than they would be in just about any other game. But
so what I mean is, like, basically role-playing rewards are player invoked. Like,
yeah.
TLDR.
But it's true. And that's exactly what we saw. I had their list of values, right? And they have their list of values, and they're trying to figure out who their character is. They're trying to role play that character. And I would step in as the game master and use game speak and say, remember that determination exists. Right. And I mean, to put it in another language, there are times when I would compel them. Right.
Yeah,
I want to see this.
Proposed complication. Yeah.
Right. I want to see it.
Yeah.
Here's a determination. And then there are other times when they're saying, I think this is speaking directly to this value. And I said, great. Well, I want to see it. Now
so I think it's speaking directly to this. I mean, the other ones, I think that sometimes because of the medium that we're speaking in right now, with whatever latency we have, which seems to be not terrible,
it's pretty good today.
Multiply it by however many people are in the room, and lots of people talking at once. I found myself in a position where I did not want to spend the opportunity cost to say those words.
Sure.
Because of the, like getting some motion in the story.
That's true.
Even
live.
It could be that you could kind of mutter those words, and the player in question could hear them without breaking the flow of a face-to-face session.
Yeah, sometimes, but often I found I had to interrupt, and so I don't think it's been a year that we've been playing. It might be a year, right?
It's really close.
Over the course,
Facebook is telling me.
Over the course of this, we have gotten used to who the characters are. So I don't really have to I don't have to complicate. I don't have to twist. I don't have to compel or invoke nearly as often. And they're putting themselves in situations where they recognize that their value will matter.
And then they just give themselves a point.
And then, they when it's determination, it becomes an out of character discussion. I think this value is being
complicated,
and I will yes or no it at that point. But I prefer it to go that way than me looming over the table to say,
And the looming, I for whatever reason, maybe because of the medium, it was I don't know what happened, and it might be that the spending. I mean, like, I don't know. I taking more time. What about the spending? I mean, did you present a high difficulty task that prompted spends, or did they?
The first time that they got to see them in action was a pretty difficult time, and it was one of their characters. And the second time, they got to see the NPC, the engineer, who is a veteran, and I forget the name of the talent he also has, but he ended up being able to kind of restore his own determination. So he was
sounds like a veteran or an orb experience.
Right. So as he's going through this extended task that he has to do in the background that I'm just running, just for the sake of practice. So they're doing one extended task. That's a scene that we're focusing on. And at the same time they're doing it, I'm following the steps myself to kind of get it into my memory and just reporting back narratively what's going on. So they got to see determination in a very positive light. This is something that they seek out, they want, and they
So yeah,
right
the
from the very
mechanical
beginning
show.
we had
It
to
sounds
describe.
like you had an opportunity to mechanically show it,
Yeah,
and it sank in.
yeah, it just clicked. So it's been a
Cool.
yeah. So I can't expect to have that happen every time. Anyway, I should save you from yourself. Thanks for
Yeah,
chatting with
I
me.
think that this has been a lot of fun, and
Yeah, we
it's
should
led me
try
to
it.
think about future Star Trek adventures.
Awesome.
So have a good whatever time of day it is.
It's 11:35. It's about to be feeding time here at the dog ranch. Take
Very
care.
good. Take care.